The Newsday continues here on One News Now. I'm Jess De Los Santos. Let's take a quick check at the equity space. The main index capped 2022 flat at 6,566. But full year shares plunged by 7.8% from where we started the year at the 7,100 level. We peaked at 7,500 back in Feb, but things went downhill from there with some bump ups back in August and November. The PSE is also optimistic after recording 9 initial public offerings in 2022, the highest number of maiden offerings since 2007. The Bourse is bullish that a bounce back will happen this year, but is our guest as hopeful? We talked to Luis Linlingan of Regina Capital. He joins us via phone. Luis, good day. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Jess. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you for joining us. First, let's take a look back at the year that was. What's your assessment here of how the index performed in 2022? Could it have been better, or could it have been worse?
I think it could have been worse, given that we fared better than the other regional markets, especially in the U.S., Europe, some parts of Asia, especially China. Towards the year end, there was the surge in COVID cases, hence the market turmoil across. As for us, it was really inflation that affected us, especially with regards to commodity prices. But despite the high inflation, the GDP growth was well above 7%, above a lot of analyst expectations.
And then, of course, there was also how bad was the exodus as well of foreign investors last year? And do you think is there much premium for them to come back in?
Well, I think they were holding, given that the earnings were much better than expected. But ultimately, we could see that they pulled out because of the weakening peso. When it traded close to the 60 level, and there was a lag with the interest rate adjustment. But afterwards, when the BSP was able to adjust according with the Fed, you could see that the peso stabilized and they returned.
And then looking back as well at 2022, was there any stock or sector that actually surprised?
Well, we looked, or everyone was paying attention to the power sector, given that the commodity prices were elevated. So there was no surprise there. I think given that the consumer sector is based on a high sales, high turnover, very low margin type of business, given that they were able to become profitable despite all the headwinds, that was still a surprise for us. And I think we saw the funds buying into the same index names such as Jollibee, URC, even in the beginning when they sold down, but seeing that the performances were still stable, you could see in the fourth quarter that they returned, given that they assumed that the earnings clarity will be intact for 2023.
Now, also looking at this chart right here, of course, Semirara was the year's top performer, miles ahead of any other blue chip here. Do you see this extending in 2023, or are we seeing a bit of a pullback?
Well, we did see already a bit of a pullback towards the fourth quarter. If I'm not mistaken, the stock price hit a high of around 44 pesos. And I think investors already cashed in, given that they think that maybe the price might have hit its peak, because there was, of course, a surprise in the coal prices. I would think that in 2023, coal prices will still be elevated versus the 2021 levels. Maybe not reaching the peak of the 2022 levels, given that the Western countries have made the necessary adjustments. But of course, I think there is still going to be a shortfall in the supply, given that they still have to make up for what Russia was previously providing.
Now, from Semirara, let's go to telcos here. How should we position when it comes to telco stocks here? Sold off in 2022. Will we see an end to the selling, even as PLDT, of course, continues to grapple with that whole budget overrun saga?
Well, with regard to PLDT, that's an isolated case. So it's really more on what development will happen for 2023. Now, with the telco sector, we're pretty much neutral on the sector. Given that I think in 2020 and 2021, it was start as a pandemic stock, given that there was going to be increased demand with people working from home and more subscription. But now that we're returning to the office, we don't think there's going to be as big a surge as we saw a couple of years ago.
All right. Now, I have to ask you this in relation, of course, to current events, that whole airspace shutdown that we had on New Year's Day. We know that's a cap problem. So does that mean that investors will be looking kindly at airline stocks?
Well, I think this is going to be treated as an isolated case, hopefully. And when the problem is resolved, they're going to brush it off.
Now, overall, last year, there was, of course, a huge improvement when it comes to earnings. Do you see that spilling over to this year?
Probably, we will see that the earnings will be stable, but we won't see as big as an earnings growth as we did in 2022. One is 2022 came from a very low base.
Okay.
So that's going to be hard to replicate. And I think second, there's a lag effect sometimes when interest rates are high. So perhaps people are going to refrain from borrowing until the interest rate environment becomes more conducive.
Okay. Which stocks, any names here to pick in 2023?
Well, we still like the banking stock just for the stability. Again, it's a high interest rate environment, and we've seen that there is a mismatch. High lending rates, but your borrowing rates are still pretty low, so the margin should be quite strong. Some specific stocks in power and transport, namely ICT. But of course, if there's any further weakness in consumer stocks, we think it's good to pick up.
Okay, now we did see 9 maiden offerings back in 2022. Do you think it's also still a good time for more companies to go public in 2023?
That's really dependent on the interest rate environment. Again, if they think that they can get better rates by borrowing, then probably they'll go to that avenue. But if they think it's easier to fundraise in the equity market, given that they have a different forecast of how interest rates will play out, especially in the second half of the year, then we could see a surge in IPO offerings.
And then lastly, President Ramon Monzon, PSE, did say that he is hopeful of a bounce back here for the index in 2023. Are you just as bullish?
Well, at this point, given what we've faced in the last 3 years, I think we can only just be bullish. We've seen how resilient the Philippine market has been over these same last 3 years. Hopefully, if there are no negative external shocks, then of course, we can see that the index will be going back to the previous highs before the pandemic.
All right, no other way to go but just be as bullish. Thank you very much again for your time this morning, Luis Limlingan of Regina Capital.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Now, what lies ahead for the local bourse? Keep it here on One News.